meeting of the Code Refresh Advisory Council to order. I want to first wish everyone a happy new year and excited to kick off the new year of our continued code refresh discussions. Before we get started, we need to call roll to confirm that we have a quorum. Start over. Nope, it's green now. All right. Okay, good afternoon. We're gonna, the second time, call the meeting of the Code Refresh Advisory Council to order. Before we get started, we have to confirm a quorum in the room. So we'll call roll. Riley Champagne.
Here.
Wayne Creedle.
Here.
Benny Gates. Tiffany Gunn. Philip Hart.
Here.
Preston Lloyd.
Here.
Eric Mai.
Here.
Charlie Menges. Jennifer Mullen. Kendra Norrell. Kate C. Overton. Maritza Peachin. Yes. Damian Pitt.
Here.
Councilwoman Robertson. Melissa Sabenko.
Here.
Brian White.
Here.
Charlie Wilson.
Here.
Letitia White. Okay, at this time, I think we do have folks that wanted to participate virtual. Benny Gates, are you online? You still don't see him? Okay, Councilwoman Robertson.
Yes, ma'am.
Robertson, if you could just give us brief reason for your request to participate virtually, and then we'll motion you in.
I'm calling in from home. I'm a little under the weather today and would appreciate it if you can just tap me in.
Great. Can I get a motion to confirm Councilwoman Robertson's participation?
So
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Any opposed? Welcome, Councilwoman Robertson.
Thank you.
And then I believe Mr. Bunn is joining us virtually around 5 p.m. So we'll keep an eye out for that. We'll have to pause and let him in as well. Okay. All right, just a couple of comments. Just a reminder that the Advisory Council is a subcommittee of the City Planning Commission. We're charged with advising the Planning Commission, the Department of Planning and Development Review, and the consultant team in the zoning ordinance revision process. The public will have an opportunity to speak during the public comment period at the beginning of the meeting. And as a reminder to the ZAC members, when you're speaking, so that folks online can hear us and they know who is speaking, if you could speak clearly, loudly, and also announce your name at the start of your comments. Also, staff is still preparing the December meeting notes, so we don't have any notes to review and vote on at this time. They'll be available at the next ZAC meeting. Are there any questions from ZAC members? All right, at this time, we'll open the public comment period. This is the opportunity for the public to comment on items that are not on the agenda. I just want to note that we, due to the length and the amount of items on our agenda, I am going to hold us to that 30-minute comment period. I let it go very long at the last meeting. I felt that was necessary since we had missed a meeting and it was the first meeting since the second maps and draft had been published, but we didn't get enough time to cover the rest of our agenda. So I am going to hold it to the 30 minutes. And if you could try to limit your comments to 3 minutes per speaker. So at this time, we'll open the public comment from the different podium. And for those of you that want to speak, if you could go ahead and line up so we can keep it moving.
So can I ask you a quick question? How do we know exactly?
There'll be a timer.
I mean, I'm not talking about it. I'm talking about the topics because I've written a little list. And if I say something that's not,
We will start.
okay, can I speak?
If you want to line up,
Okay.
the speakers.
Thank you.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Richard Hankins, Executive Director of Partnership for Smarter Growth.
Can we have some lights on the?
There is no microphone if you, Richard.
Sure.
Speak.
We advocate for a Richmond that plans sustainably, grows inclusively, and connects communities. We appreciate y'all's work on draft 2 of the zoning code refresh and the city's efforts to modernize regulations to support walkability, neighborhood vitality, and inclusive growth. However, we continue to ask this committee or council and ensure that the zoning codes allow for more types of housing in an equitable way across all council districts, more opportunities for increased affordability, and more opportunities for small businesses. Today, we want to focus on those small commercial uses. While we're encouraged that draft 2 would conditionally permit limited commercial uses under 1,500 square feet with clear standards, we're concerned that the limits that these commercial uses must be in the same building as at least one dwelling unit greatly limits real-world applicability and excludes small retail or service uses and accessory structures that are historically common and compatible in many Richmond neighborhoods, including Churchill, Museum District, and North Side. National best practices and research on these accessory commercial units show that small neighborhood serving businesses such as cafes, barbershops, places for tutoring or little repair shops can operate successfully in accessory buildings and can lower barriers to local entrepreneurship while reflecting a pattern of incremental, small, human-scale development. We ask that you all today allow for more flexibility in these commercial unit uses so that it can benefit small businesses, walkability, and opportunities for community building. Thank you guys for your work in considering these refinements to make the code more equitable and reflective of Richmond's development patterns.
Good afternoon, council. My name is Annika Shun. I'm a housing policy advocate at Housing Opportunities Made Equal of Virginia. We are a proud member of the Homes for All Our Neighbors Coalition. And I just wanted to say a few words about displacement today. I'll try to be brief. So in private conversations with folks, as well as observing public comment on drafts 1 and 2, I've noticed a lot of people dismissing the idea that building in more expensive areas can contribute to affordability across the city. And I just want to very clearly state for the public record that it is actually crucial that we build in more expensive areas if we want to avoid displacement. And the reason for that is that when somebody wants to buy a home in the West End or Ginter Park or Stratford Hills, but there aren't enough homes available to buy, or, you know, there's nothing that's exactly in their price range, they end up looking for somewhere to live in places like Brooklyn Park or Oak Grove or Fulton Hill. And then they compete against buyers with shallower pockets and drive up property values for folks who are already living in those neighborhoods on a tight budget. So if we want to make sure that folks can continue to stay and continue to live in the city with us, we actually really need to make sure that we add more housing in more exclusionary and expensive areas where there's a lot of demand for people to live. And I also want to just clarify that the data is very clear that building market rate housing slows rent growth the most for older and more affordable buildings. So it is crucial that we add more homes in areas where there is already demand so that we can protect our lower income neighbors and make sure they get to stay in the city. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Sally Valentine, and my husband and I live at 2317 Grove Avenue. We have 6 other rental properties in the fan. And I have to say, starting off, I disagree strongly with the speaker who preceded me because the fan is dense enough. And right now, we're closest to the ADU that was built at Davis and Grove Avenue. Excuse me. And that is a monstrous home. It has, the first floor has space for 2 cars, and then it has 2 floors above that. And it's literally in the house that faces a Grove. It's almost on their back porch. So they have a very teeny tiny backyard now. And so parking is so tight in the Fan. And my concerns are what other people I've talked to in the Fan have said, a lack of sunlight. Beside us, we live next to Miss Babb's daycare. So Mrs. Babb's right now has a 3-year waiting list. And they currently have just built an attachment a few years ago to the back of their dwelling. And they have a playground on the top of that additional unit, I guess you could call it. And I know that the owner wants to expand the number of children that he can have at that daycare. And right now he's got a little space of Grove Avenue where parents can come in and drop their children off and pick them up. And so my concern living next to the daycare is that if we are going to allow them to build more structures in their backyard, the growth is going to kill the neighborhood feel that we currently have. And that's just one instance that I thought of. Also, there was an article in the paper the other day, and the mayor was talking about, the higher number of pedestrian deaths. And I know the Fan is a very difficult place to drive at night. Pedestrians and joggers do not wear reflective clothing. They have earbuds in their ears. They step out into the sidewalk or the crosswalk without even looking. And there have been so many times when I've had a close encounter that have really scared me. We have scooters, we have bicyclists, we have joggers since COVID that are running towards us on the actual street and not using the sidewalks. So I'm concerned that if we increase the density, especially in an extremely dense area already, we're shooting ourselves in the foot. We're just going to have the same problems. And I don't know what the answer will be because the decision will already be made to have these extra dwellings in our neighborhood. And they've already tried to reduce the number of cars because we've got speed bumps now everywhere. We have bump outs that has reduced available parking. And so those are my concerns. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else present that would like to offer comments at this time? Okay, Marianne, if we could move to the online participants. Copeland Casati. Okay, Copeland Casati, you want to unmute yourself and offer your comments, please? Copeland,
Yep, can you hear me? Sorry.
thank you. Welcome.
Thanks. I completely agree with Sally in regards to ADU square footage. When we talked about ADUs, as Richmond originally envisioned it, everybody pictured granny flats, not an entire house against their neighbor. I think it's really important to keep extra dwelling units at a small scale. And speaking of dwelling units, illegal Airbnbs have already pushed out many of our neighbors who relied on existing affordable housing out of our neighborhoods. On my block alone, we went from 1 illegal Airbnb to 5 that I know about in the last year. These were all homes that traditionally rented to students, healthcare workers, and teachers. I guess my question to zoning is, how many illegal Airbnbs have been shut down in the last year? Because I know that if we freed up the over 1,000 illegal short-term rentals in our neighborhoods, we would have a lot more room for annual leases for our local population. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Barry O'Keefe. Barry O'Keefe, you can unmute yourself and offer your comments.
Hello, my name's Barry O'Keefe. I'm a member of the Homes for All Our Neighbors Coalition. I think there is a danger that misinformed local advocates will contradict the overwhelming consensus on the intersection of zoning reform and climate action. A quick search into the stated positions of our major national and international climate organizations on zoning reform makes this clear. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, Sierra Club National, 350.org, the national chapter of the League of Conservation Voters, C40 Cities, Smart Growth America. None of these organizations are equivocal in their support for zoning reform as an essential tool to reduce emissions and increase the sustainability of our overall land use. The city has declared a climate emergency and a housing crisis. Legalizing dense, mixed-use, walkable, transit-oriented development is not a matter of personal preference. It's a without which not we cannot address these stated crises. The Community Climate Collaborative, Chesapeake Climate Action Network, Southside Relief, and Climate Change Makers are all members of the Homes for All Our Neighbors Coalition. I would urge the ZAC to be in dialogue with them.
Thank you. Marianne?
William Wilson.
William Wilson?
Hello. Hey, thank you for the opportunity to comment. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. I just want to make a quick comment elevating some concerns I had on the draft 2 zoning map. This is in regards to transition standards. I live in Jackson Ward. I've been a renter in Jackson Ward for about 10 years. I'm a member of the Historic Jackson Ward Association and the Homes for All Our Neighbors Coalition. I live on Marshall Street, which is kind of a gateway between a gateway, but it's sort of a transition zone between some of the MX zoning along Broad Street and then some of the more neighborhood level RB, RA zoning along the kind of the interior parts of the Jackson Ward neighborhood. So I've been kind of sensitive in reviewing some of these transition standards. The one that applies most directly to my neck of the neighborhood is the transition type C. The reason I guess this is concerning to me, some of the language or provisions in there is because a lot of our corridor level mixed use zoning areas are only one, not more than one parcel deep, right? You have the between Broad and the alley, and then it goes right into the residential zoning. So all those transition standards are applied to just the entirety of that corridor on either side. So at transition type C, just a couple comments on that. First, I like y'all to focus and review some of the language there. It does seem like ours are step backs. The transition type C is two things. It's transition screening in some cases. It's step backs in some other cases, which is upper level, not setbacks, but step backs. Right now, it prescribes a 15-foot step back at 3 stories and 5 stories. It does seem that we're kind of more on the aggressive side in some other cities. Transition step backs I've reviewed and looked at and might follow up with some of those cases. 15 is a normal, 12 to 15 foot is a normal step back depth, but I think we are applying it rather frequently, both at the 3rd story and the 5 story. So I just asked that we kind of review that and see if there's some ways to bring that down. I'm not going to have any specific solutions for that, but I just asked that this body kind of review those standards. Well, okay, maybe I got 2 things. I said I didn't, but 2 things maybe we could look at is kind of having an alley credit. Right now it applies even backing an alley, so we could lessen the prohibition on the building by maybe incorporating some of that alley space, 10 to 12 feet, maybe include that as part of the step back depth. It's providing some of the space already. There could also be a shallow lot cap. Maybe we could cap the total step back depth to maybe so it's no more than 20%, let's say, of the total lot depth. So just some ideas to play with. These seems like there are those have been used in some cases in other cities. Maybe it applies here. My point being that transition type C, having those 2 step back depths, they might intersect with actually having functional floor plates on some of these Broad Street parcels. Which of course it's our arts district, but it's also our pulse corridor. So I want to see more housing there. I want to see more neighbors there. So let's just make sure we're not overriding our zoning, our mixed use zoning with aggressive transition provisions. Thank you.
Thank you. Evan? Evan?
Hi, can you all hear me okay?
Welcome.
Awesome. My name is Kevin Sanfrini. I'm a co-lead with Climate Change Makers. Barry, thank you for the shout out. We are an organization which advocates for climate policies in Greater Richmond. We are also a coalition member of Homes for All Our Neighbors. I'd like to keep my comment kind of short today. I recently became a new dad, and the gravity of the climate crisis has never been more real to me than it is now. Zoning can be an instrument for progress in the climate fight, but the outdated and overly restrictive zoning code in Richmond does the opposite. It makes public transportation difficult to run successfully, and it makes it so that Richmonders must drive to most of their everyday destinations. Tackling climate change means offering great public transport, and then therefore that also means sensible land use reform. Richmond should be willing to raise the floor of its zoning code. That means making proposals like the RDA district more dense. Richmond has too many McMansions, and we all hate McMansions. The RDA district accounts for nearly 15% of Draft 2's proposed area, and that is simply too much. Please not only consider more density by offering more in our most dense districts, but also achieve it by making it sensible to offer varying types of homes in our most exclusive districts, like by offering duplexes everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sally Freeman.
Sally Freeman, you want to unmute and offer your comments? Sally Freeman? Okay, we're gonna hold on Sally at the moment. We'll come back to you.
And Habitat.
Richmond Habitat, if you want to unmute, you can offer your comments.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Actually, I'm Dave Neary. I'm the CEO of Richmond Habitat. Unfortunately, we have a technical issue with the way Teams works. But thank you for the opportunity also to speak about Code Refresh. Habitat's been building affordable and preserving and building affordable housing for 4 decades now. We're celebrating our 40th anniversary in the region. And we're also a part of the Homes for All of Our Neighbors Coalition. And we're supporting the Code Refresh, and not as a theoretical planning exercise, but as a very practical housing solution. As its core, this is about alignment, and our zoning code should reflect the city that we are today and the city that we want to become, and not the city of the past in the 50s. Right now, too many common sense housing solutions are illegal by default, slow to approve, or unnecessarily expensive to build. That's not market failure, that's a policy failure. Code Refresh doesn't lower standards, it modernizes them. It allows more housing types in more places near jobs, schools, and transit without changing neighborhood character overnight. In fact, the greatest risk to neighborhood stability is doing nothing while housing costs continue to rise and supply continues to fall behind demand. And we know this after decades across the country of witnessing the challenges that occur in neighborhoods. From an affordable housing perspective, zoning drives cost. Time is money. Uncertainty is money. And when we reduce uncertainty friction in the system, we unlock nonprofit, private, and mission-driven builders to do what they really want to do, to create homes regular Richmonders can afford. This isn't about density for density's sake. It's about choice, fairness, and long-term community resilience. Code Refresh isn't the whole solution, but it's a foundational infrastructure. And if we're serious about affordability, equity, and growth, this is a necessary step forward. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Is there anybody else online to speak?
Not seeing anyone else online.
Is there anybody else online this time that would like to offer comments? Last call with this in the room, if you haven't already offered comments.
Can I do one more? Okay.
Okay, with that, we're going to close the public comment period and move us into the next section where Miriam Pitts will give us a council recap and of our last, just to refresh everyone on our last meeting and introduction for today's agenda.
Good evening, Miriam Pitts with the Planning Department. At the last meeting, you were introduced to the second draft of the Code Refresh project. The consultant team will walk you through some of the major changes between draft 1 and draft 2. Today, we're going to continue that conversation because we didn't have an opportunity to go through everything. They provided some additional maps as requested, so we'll go through some of those map questions that were asked. You'll see that in the packet before you. You'll also have a copy of the draft administrative regulations. Those will be introduced this evening, but provided for comment at the next meeting. Walk through these at the next meeting. I know there's a desire to also go back and look at the development standards where there were comments from the advisory council and the rules of interpretation. So those will be agenda items at the next meeting as well. And today, that was today. And that's all I have. We've been planning the working groups, and we had the High Quality Places Working Group meeting last night. I would like to apologize those for all in attendance for the venue. It was really hot and difficult to hear. Learning experience, and that group might end up meeting again because we didn't get through all of those agenda items. So they'll be over the next couple of weeks that we're meeting with the working groups, and I'll be bringing those back to you. Likewise, in February, we'll have those wrapped up as well to share the thoughts that we're gaining from those working groups.
Any members have any questions for Mary Ann?
There's one other item for today that I forgot to introduce. Right after this, we're going to have a brief open discussion that Elizabeth's going to lead on some items, hearing what we've been hearing in the community and other things, open time for discussion.
If there are no other questions, we'll move to the next part of the agenda. Mary Ann gave a preview that thought it would be good because we often come in here with a very heavy agenda. And while we have Q&A, we don't have just a dedicated open slot for us to ask questions of staff, the consultants who are with us. I see Renee Bieberstein is online, or just have an open discussion amongst the council. I know there's a lot of information circulating in the community. Not all of it's coming from the city. We know that there's been flyers and interest groups formed. There's around town, you've seen some billboards that I personally find a little misleading that say that Code Refresh is going to allow rooming houses. So thought this would be a good time if you have questions about what you're hearing in the community or what community feedback that the staff is getting. We just have a brief moment, about 30 minutes to just openly chat. So with that, I'll open it to the floor. All right, before we start, remember to announce your name and speak loudly so folks can hear you online.
This is Eric Mai. I think my concern overall and just question is why pull back? Especially for these single family residential districts. To not allow duplexes, to not allow triplexes or anything, as was, again, I'll refer to the affordable housing plan that council adopted several years ago. That was a goal, a recommendation of that plan that was adopted by the city. Obviously went through council, went through public hearing, was accepted. And so why are we not allowing duplexes? Why are we not being bold? And it seems very, I don't want to, I'll say the word cowardly, to kind of give that up so early and quickly.
I would, excuse me. Thank you. I'm Brian White. While I might, my personal preference might be more aligned with what Eric just expressed, I think the worst outcome for all that we're doing is to not have the political support it needs to pass. We need to focus on what is possible. We need clear rules of the road, and we're not going to get something that eliminates single family zoning, period. And we can say that we either like that or don't like that. It almost doesn't matter, because what we've got is a political process that we have to clear. So we need to focus on what is possible and not our dreams, in my opinion.
I can just counter on that that's the wrong choice of language to say eliminating single family zoning. It's not being eliminated. You're just allowing other types of housing. And so that is a misnomer or it is exclusive language. And we want to be a city of inclusion. And I think that the person that can buy a home in the city right now, I would say the median home price is probably well over $400,000. And to afford that, you have to make more than $100,000. That is more than the median renter income in the city. And so how can we be inclusive in the first district and the third district or the sixth? To allow for people who make lower incomes to live there.
I hear you.
So-
All I want to do is end up with something that gets approved, that improves where we are from where we are today. And I don't want to let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
So Eric, I'm gonna.
Sorry, yeah.
I'm gonna give Melissa, and then Maritza, and then Benny.
Just sort of, this is Melissa Savinko, and I kind of have 2 points. Number one, there's a lot of conversation always around median home price and that median income can't afford median home price. You know, as somebody who sells real estate for a living, median is the middle. There are plenty of homes available to purchase that are below $300,000. And there are homes available to purchase that are under $250,000. So that's one. I just want us to be kind of clear and consistent on that, because I do think that sometimes it can be misleading. Number two, if we do require or allow duplexes on every residential parcel, I think that is in fact eliminating single family zoning. And I think the opportunity to have the preservation bonus is sort of a fair compromise, which still allows a second full property plus an ADU.
In the Richmond 300, Maritza Peachin. I remember early in the Richmond 300 process, it was like consensus means that like not everyone like gets their way. I don't know. It was like, it just means that like you can like live with what's presented. And so like, that's how I feel about what you're saying, Melissa, with the like the density bonus that we've put in draft 2. I think that kind of from what I've read, and maybe someone can show me other information, but in cities that have allowed duplexes by right everywhere, like Minneapolis or other places, that has not produced a very large amount of housing. It actually ends up being pretty difficult to do some of that because it's kind of expensive. You have to like tap into the sewer line, like all sorts of things make it expensive. Construction costs, so it doesn't produce a lot of housing. And I think we have spent so much time on this topic that we kind of haven't been spending time on the corridors and the nodes and really making sure that the zoning that we're proposing for those areas are correct. And that the development standards that we're proposing will enable people to develop housing in an efficient way, or not just housing, but like any development. So I guess I'm sort of like wanting to spend more time on those items. And maybe decide that like where we are with single family zoning for the R districts is like, okay. In terms of the duplex allowed everywhere, or triplex 3 allowed everywhere.
Any Gates, I have a whole lot of things I would love to say, but I'm going to try to hone in on what I want to talk about, which is just the crisis that we are in. You know, you can talk all day long, but when you have 1 million people in America that are homeless, you have any given day, almost 10,000 people in Richmond that are homeless. It's a problem. America has a problem. Virginia has a problem. Richmond has a problem. I don't care what you call them. You can call them unsheltered. You can call them, it's all different types of names they're using. But at the end of the day, when you don't have somewhere to stay, and that's one of the basic human needs, there's a problem. I really have an issue with people who are so concerned about my park in my backyard, this and that, when there are people who have nowhere to live. I've been homeless. I've lived in a car. I know how it feels. It does not feel good to not have somewhere to stay. That's a basic human need. We all need that. It's not something that's a luxury. It's something that we should all have. And that is why we create these situations where we have the haves and the have-nots. And the haves and the have-nots, I'm going to just read some of these neighborhoods, and you can get offended, and I really don't care at this point, because I want to make a point that you have places like Windsor Farms, Wilton, Country Club of Virginia, University of Richmond, Stonewall Court, Three Chop, Colonial Place, Forest Hill, Monument Avenue Park, and Willow Lawn. These places where the median income, and I'm using the word median income because that's what they determine, which are these exclusive places. They're making almost $500,000. So they can afford a lot of things that the other people cannot afford. You can say there's a lot of housing on the 250. That's a lie. There is not hardly any housing in this city that's still under $250,000. There just isn't. There may used to be, but there isn't. The prices have gone so far up. And when your income doesn't go up, you have no way to afford a home. Now we're going to opposite end. You have Gilpin, Fairfield, Creighton, Mosby, Monroe Ward, Eastview, Whitcomb Court, anything on Jeff Davis, Richmond Highway now, Route 1, Hillside Court, Windsor, Fairmont, Broad Rock Sports Complex. These places, these people make under $30,000. How in the world can you afford a home making $30,000 in the city of Richmond? Please explain this to me. You sell real estate, explain this to me. I don't understand. I'm not a real estate agent, but I'm a human and I'm a community health worker, and I work with people, and I'm around homeless people all the time. I'm around people that don't have all the time. They're the have and the have-nots, and I don't care what you say. It's not black and white. It's the haves and the have-nots. And the haves are always making decisions, and the have-nots always suffer. So that's how I feel, and nobody's going to change that because I've been a have-not. I've been around. I went to school with the haves, and I understand the difference. You guys need to do your homework, do your research, and think about the human aspect of all of this. So at the end of the day, you can make them paint a picture. You can talk about the politics of what's going to get passed. But at the end of the day, you should have a heart to want to do the right thing. And that's to make sure as many people as we can get into a home. And I don't need to read the definition of what a homeless is and what a home is. I believe we all know that, right? Richmond, we have a problem. It's not Houston that has a problem. It's Richmond that has a problem. That's all I can say. I'm upset.
Thank you, Betty.
Hold on.
Are there any other comments or?
If I could just kind of maybe piggyback off of what Benny's saying, I feel like we here, we're getting really technical and in the weeds when I feel like we need to focus on what the goal is. And the goal is to obviously align with the comp plan, right? But, meet these very specific goals and future goals of the city. But zoning controls housing. It controls housing supply. It controls the market. And by constantly thinking of the restrictions we want to place on housing development, we're not going to meet our goals. And I'm never going to say that building duplexes out in the first district is going to lead to more affordability, but we keep controlling the market, and that is creating the inability to produce the supply that's needed to meet the need. And so I think that I'm trying to think of a way of abundance and a way of inclusion to think of, how can we just build more housing? And not just, thinking about the way it looks and all these things, but like, let's meet the goals to meet the needs of the people who live in our community or who want to live here. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so on first of all, I agree with Maritza's point that we've spent a sort of disproportionate amount of time in this process on the matters of duplexes and ADUs, which you might call, kind of the infill elements of this project that we're working on here. And what I've observed is objections to the duplex and ADU elements from two very different perspectives. One, you might generally characterize as objections from the haves, as Benny put it, based on the concerns we've all heard throughout the process around perceived impacts to property values or quality of life or parking or this, that, and the other, all of which I think anyone could have seen coming in this process. But we also saw objections rooted in the concern that in our, currently more affordable neighborhoods, that this, these opportunities for increased ADUs and duplexes and such, as well as some of the other changes proposed, would lead to tear downs and gentrification via the tearing down of existing homes and replacing them with something more expensive. And that, in my mind, emerged as a concern that I didn't expect. Again, I certainly expected the first set of concerns, but that second set was a little more unexpected. And I think to Brian's point, I think it's the political implications of that concern is what has inspired some of the rolling back that we've seen, right? So I think it's important to kind of set that whole context. What we've come up with in response is a creative solution around I forget what we're calling it, but you can build the second unit if you retain the first, right? The preservation incentive, right? I appreciate the creativity of that. And I think we also need to bear in mind that if we're coming from the perspective of, what's best for the environment and the climate crisis, I agree with those. I think it's clear that zoning reform is a solution. But we're hearing other folks who don't see it that way. But presumably what we could all agree on is that tearing down a perfectly functional living structure, throwing the vast majority of a landfill and building something else is not good environmentally from a perspective. So I do think that taking steps to avoid to not create an incentive for tear downs is a good approach. Like that's something we need to be thinking of. But I do also wonder if we've gone a little too far, and this is more for the builders and developers and real estate people in the room. I worry if the what name again? The preservation bonus is a little too onerous and complicated and not going to result in any infill. And that would be an overcorrection in my mind. And the other thing I'll say is that, again, back to what Maritza had said, all of this is kind of nibbling on the margins in terms of how are we going to come up with our 35,000 housing units. And the way that we come up with that is through changing the zoning itself to allow more types of development in our nodes and corridors. And I'm concerned that we're not seeing enough of that in certain areas. We're not overlapping. I'd like to see an overlay of the nodes and corridors on these zoning change maps, but what I'm saying is in the West End, if you look at the all other residential districts maps, we see a lot of what this means is non-detached housing, right? So we got detached housing, which is in all the areas we know it to be. And then we've got other residential districts in the Family Museum District, in Churchill, and in a smattering of other locations, right? So I think that we need to make sure that what we're doing here is fulfilling that nodes and corridors objective and allowing for more types of development. I think the West End, everyone who has successfully lobbied to not have like duplexes by right in that neighborhood, now's your chance to work with us and support some zoning changes to allow more other types of development in order to increase housing stock and address the housing affordability crisis. That's all.
Thank you. I saw Casey hadn't spoken.
Sorry. Yeah, I can speak now. And this is Casey.
Can you speak up a little bit?
Yes, I can. This is Casey. My name is Casey Overton. I agree that we've spent disproportionate amount of time on density. I think density is still important to talk about, in some ways warrants the disproportionate amount of time we've spent on it. I just want to lift that density has a historic relationship also to race. Benny was kind enough to not mention race much in his expressions, which I feel and align with very deeply, but I will. And historically, density and race have a really insidious relationship where the forces of zoning, in Richmond being one of the cities where racialized zoning was created in this country, it was used to exclude people based on race. And we still see the residues of that in our zoning ordinance because it's old, and that's why we're changing it. Part of this is also a racial justice concern, and I don't know that that gets raised enough, not only in this body, but just in the conversation generally. I feel like that doesn't get the airtime that it deserves. So while density does come with legitimate concerns, I worry that we'll be throwing the baby out with the bathwater if we do not create the flexibility that we need to resolve and reconcile the racial issues of our past because of zoning and through zoning, where protections for vulnerable populations can be added back in. When we do have our overlay conversations, when we do have our regulations conversations, we can add in protections to address the concerns that a lot of folks are talking about when they are opposed to density. I also hope that we can all really explore in our interior our own relationships to density and whether or not our concerns come from the imagination of the haves or the have-nots, of those who want to free people and house people or those who want to exclude. I think that's worth us all doing our interior journaling and prayer or whatever you do, because this is our chance to hopefully create the city that we need for the future. I also think about the survey data from some months ago that we got back. Overwhelmingly, I think about more diverse neighborhoods, Blacker neighborhoods, and younger people who are all supportive of more density as well. If we were to, even though a lot of these groups are underrepresented, if we were to extrapolate that out, we would probably find that the future of Richmond and a more inclusive Richmond would be more supportive of more density, and it would probably not look like a lot of the feedback we hear in these meetings where certain communities and populations are underrepresented. So if we're concerned about creating a Richmond that really works for everyone, I don't know that always what we hear and that the loudest voices are going to be able to guide us towards that future. All that to say, I want to see, and I think it serves all of us to see, as much flexibility in the base zoning code as possible, so that later on, we will have to build in protections, we will have to build in more regulation, but I think it's easier to do that than start with something that's more restrictive and then trying to figure out loopholes and ways to get around. If we start with flexible, then we can kind of constrict from there in the areas where we need to. But if we start with rigid, the thing will just snap. And I want us to be positioned to create a future where I put my budget into Zillow and I see more dots pop up to make this very real. There's places where I can't even dream about living in the city. And I'm like, out of my friends, I'm one of the people who's making the most and doing the best. And that's scary. I don't want to have to move out of Richmond. I don't want to have to leave. And I certainly don't want to see the elders on my block get displaced, because that's an absolute no for me too. Displacement, I'm concerned about that too. And I will fight like hell to make sure that my neighbors are protected, because that's also, I want to see a Richmond that's truly for everyone. I understand the concerns about political expediency. I understand the concerns about the political will and whether or not we're going to be able to make something that actually gets passed, that it makes sense. But for me and me sleeping well at night, I need to be on the right side of history. And I need to advocate for what I know can hopefully position us to reconcile.
to make an inclusive Richmond that everyone can hopefully live together in, and that we can get rid of some of the city segregation, that we can get rid of some of this, you know, what we're seeing where haves and have-nots are going to continue to be divided, stratified. These disparities will only grow unless we use this opportunity to create the flexibility that the city will need to be nimble, because things are changing. We are facing a housing crisis, and the people's concerns are real, and we can solve for them in other creative ways that don't involve just having a fearful kind of reactive response. So that's it for now. Thank y'all.
Thank you, Casey. Marita and Charlie and then Wayne, and then we're probably gonna have to wrap up if we want to stay on the agenda. So just keep that in mind.
Wanted to say, like, one thing that Eric said about restrictions on like housing and development and like, I mean, in some ways, that's what the zoning ordinance does. Like Houston doesn't have one. There's no restrictions. You can do whatever you want. I don't think we want to do that. So we think we definitely want some restrictions on like what can go where in our city and what it looks like. However, there are a lot of restrictions in here beyond density.
Yeah.
Like if you are building I should have looked at this before. There's a thing about like your entrance, and like if your building is so long, you have to have an entrance every 60 feet, whatever. Okay, well, that might make sense. But then when you're like looking at it, you're like, well, does it make sense to force me to put where my door is? And if you are building a building, like maybe you don't want a door on one side of the building for a number of reasons. But the zoning code would force you to put a door there. And like, then you'd have like zoning staff, like I can just think of like the massive amount of checklist of like trying to enforce every single one of these. It's just gonna take a very long time, and that's delay on creating the buildings that add more tax revenue to our city, which then help pay for all of our services. So I think we need to look hard at those restrictions. And the second is kind of more globally to what Damien was saying, what some people were saying online about climate change. And the nexus really between climate change and land use that helps move the needle on reducing greenhouse gas emissions is transportation. It's making sure that you have more density near the areas where you are going to plan more transit, and that you also have streets that connect to each other in more of a grid pattern so that it's easier to walk around and make walkability possible. So like, that's why I keep going back to like corridors and nodes, because like, that's really where you want the density. If you allow density everywhere and developers can do it anywhere, they're gonna go to where it's cheapest, most likely, and like where they think the market will work. They want it to be connected to transportation, but like, they're not gonna be as focused on like that transportation driving it. Maybe I'm being like not all developers think equally the same, or not all like one class, but anyway, like, but generally that's probably what will happen. And you don't want to have like random outposts of like retail in a random intersection in the middle of a neighborhood that like nobody can get to. But it's allowed by zoning, but nobody can get there and everyone's driving. That doesn't help us with our climate goals. So that's nodes and corridors. There's a lot of restrictions in here that we need to like look at closely.
Mrs. Elizabeth Greenfield, before we get to Charlie, I just will note that I have mentioned to Marianne that we need to take a deeper dive into chapters 3 and 4, which Marianne mentioned we would be doing in the next meeting. I share some of the concerns that you've outlined. And I think some of the changes that were suggested when we first addressed these chapters wasn't made because there was so much focus on getting the revised maps out, but they have been captured, and we will discuss that more in future meetings. So I'm gonna let Charlie and then Wayne, and then you get a really quick one because we're gonna get past the agenda.
Charlie Wilson, I'll be quick too. I just wanted to say, really glad we had this moment in our agenda. So thanks for doing that.
Thank Marianne.
Thanks, Marianne. I don't know if we can do this type of conversation every single meeting, but I think it was good timing for it. Most of us in the room have been on this for like 18 months, something like that, maybe more. That's not nothing, right? That's a lot of time. We've all been here. We've all showed up. We're all doing the work. Code Studio's actually doing the work. Staff's actually doing the work, but we're here, right? And I don't know. I just worry that that's overlooked in the public. Like this is a body that is doing it, right? And the thought of you know, a billboard here, a billboard there being somehow more impactful just personally frustrates me. I'm very appreciative of the conversations we have here and just wanted to say thank you all. Obviously, it's not an easy conversation most of the time, but just keep doing the work.
I'm gonna go quickly. This is Dr. Wayne Cradle. I wanted to also echo what Charlie is saying. I really do think that this was needed from day one, to be honest. Couple of things. I want to be quick so we can get to the agenda. I invite us to be careful of the word focus. I think to say, hey, let's focus. And I don't, not to speak about anybody here, but when we say, hey, let's focus, it can come off dismissive. It's hard to focus when you're hungry. It's hard to focus when you're vulnerable. It's hard to focus when you don't have. And sometimes those words like that, even if we don't intend it to be like that, can come off as if we are needing to ignore an issue. And so we are here because there is a housing crisis. We have a zoning advisory council because there's a housing crisis. And so I think we are focused and we're wrestling with an issue that is complex. That's okay. I also think that what would help me, I am curious about the timeline of our council. There's been a lot of logistics that has happened, us switching locations, different committees switching out, different members switching out. And so I'm somewhat lost. So I'm curious as to if we can receive some logistical streamlining as well. But other than that, I really do appreciate this conversation. I think it should be definitely included in our future meetings. So, yeah.
Yeah, Damian Pitt, just back on the nodes and corridors. When I advocate for that, I also mean the neighborhood scale micro nodes, right? We're not just talking about major roads, major intersections. We're talking about, we're fortunate in Richmond to have a lot of this development pattern already where we have neighborhood scale commercial development with a little bit of residential density around it in some cases. Richmond 300 calls for more of that. I think that's a great thing, including neighborhood, walkable commercial, neighborhood serving commercial, and we should be looking for opportunities to increase that development pattern in areas where it doesn't already exist.
Thank you. So this is Elizabeth Greenfield again. I want to thank everyone for the very candid conversation. I agree that have more of this open dialogue, and I'll talk to Marianne about carving space out on future agendas. If anything, it gives us a chance to talk as a group, but also ask questions for things that we are hearing from our communities, friends, and neighbors that we don't always get to discuss as well. I will say before we move on, if you don't already attend your council members' district meeting, I have been to mine. I've been outside of my district. I've seen many at one, and the overwhelming voice are those that are concerned with density and the things that we have grappled with here. At least from the few that I've attended, not all 9, but I would say that is a great place to have your voice heard, because that is where a lot of people are engaging and speaking up in addition to the online maps. So just leave that little nugget with you. And with that, I'm going to turn it, unless there are any other questions or comments. I made note of Dr. Creedle's comment about needing some kind of logistical information on where things stand with the ZAC and where we are and where we're going. And I'll talk to Marianne, as I said, about carving some of this free conversation on future agendas. Anybody else? All right, well, I will turn it over to our consultants. I see Renee and Colin both online. Welcome.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Let me share my screen again. All right, can you see my screen?
Good.
Okay. Hopefully you can see the next slide now. Still sensitive to that very first meeting when you weren't seeing my slides change and I was already halfway through the presentation. Good. Yes. So I think this is a fairly open-ended kind of presentation and discussion today. Maybe kind of continuing on the discussion you guys just had. I'm going to go over some of the mapping changes between drafts 1 and drafts 2 in a little bit more detail, as was requested last time. Oh, got a hand up. Sure.
One second. Andrew Bunn has joined the meeting. We were going to admit him virtually.
Yes, Chair Greenfield has stepped away. This is Preston Lloyd. We need to vote to admit Mr. Bunn virtually. If you could please unmute him briefly. And Mr. Bunn, if you could please state why you're requesting to participate virtually and where you'll be participating from, we'll then have a motion second and a vote to admit you to the meeting.
Yes, hello. Sorry to interrupt. I wanted to make sure you saw that I had just joined. I am coming to you from the VCU library, and I'm participating virtually due to a one-time conflict with class.
Great, thank you for that, and glad you could join us. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Mr. Bunn, a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great, Mr. Bunn, you're now permitted to participate virtually. Hand it back to the consultant team. Renee?
All right, thank you. So let me just restart this briefly. So I'm going to give a short presentation and we can have some discussion as we go. Really, this is going to be pretty open-ended. And so beginning by just kind of going over some of the mapping changes between draft 1 and draft 2 in a little bit more detail. As was requested last time. And then I'm going to kind of go back into the discussion that we had last time about sort of major changes that had happened between draft 1 and draft 2, aside from mapping based ones for the most part. You know, I did kind of go back. This feels like it was a long time ago before the break that we met last, but I did go back and check that. We did sort of touch on everything before, but I think there was a feeling that we were kind of running out of time and wanted to discuss some of these topics more. So I'm going to kind of let you guys kind of jump in if you want to talk about any of the topics, and we can happy to kind of keep discussing them with you. And then at the end, we're going to introduce the draft administration section, which is really the last main component of the code, the draft code. We're going to be sharing kind of we have shared a very rough draft with you guys, which is it's not yet going to be added into the formal draft 2. I think the intention is to kind of hear your comments on it and work through some stuff with staff and hopefully kind of add it into draft 3 when that's done. So it's still a bit of a work in progress, but wanted to kind of get that out there. And with that, that's kind of the last unfinished component of the draft. There's still some definition sections and a few other minor things, but this is the last main piece that was missing. So let me keep moving, and I'm just going to rely on Elizabeth or whoever is there to help moderate, because I can't see you guys very well on the screen if anybody's raising their hand. So with the mapping changes here, so we pull these apart. We're happy to kind of make more of these maps for the next session if we want other analysis. There was a comment before about corridors and nodes and trying to understand this. I mean, I think that, you know, both the first and the second drafts were intended to be aligned for the direction of Richmond 300. And so we made a number of tweaks as we went along. So this, what you're seeing here is the detached districts. So RDA, RDB, and RDC mapped out. This is draft 1. And I know this is going to be a little bit of a challenge because it's a smaller screen, but this is draft 2. So this is a bit of a kind of spot the difference thing here. A lot of the changes are small and kind of don't show up that well on, you know, the scale of map. If you look at the online interactive version, it'll tell you what the previous draft was saying about a property and where we're ending up now. So if you want to zoom in and check certain spots, but I'm just going to kind of give you kind of major highlights here in terms of global kind of themes to the changes. We made a lot of little tiny things based on comments and corrections and whatever that can't really be captured in this presentation, but some of the major changes here were, there's a lot of changes between the 3 different RD districts. We heard specific comments and we kind of went back and looked at some neighborhoods about what the kind of predominant lot width was and changed the threshold a little bit. We also added some RDC. So there's some areas that in the first draft here in this don't show up. They're just gray. If you look at the second draft, there's some RDC added. Those are areas that were probably mostly RA in the previous draft. And again, based on some discussions with staff and and other community members, we changed some of that to RDC. A lot of the stuff is just like, gray areas where the kind of the current character or the current sort of appearance of those neighborhoods sort of fell on the edge between detached and attached. There might have been a little bit of a mix, and we were trying to sort of, figure out what the kind of threshold is we wanted to capture. The other thing was that we were, the first draft, some of the kind of zoning we did in the first draft was influenced by existing zoning. So, where there was attached permissions in some neighborhoods, even though they were mostly detached in character, we gave some of those areas attached zoning because we didn't want to take that away from them. We heard back from some people that, maybe they were not appropriately zoned to begin with, and, they were mostly detached. So we went back and changed some of those RAs to RDC. That was just some of the logic there. I'm just going to go through the rest of these slides here, and then maybe I'll let you guys jump in and I can flip back. This is all the other residential districts together. So other than the detached, so this is a very little bit of the residential cottage, the residential attached, and the residential mixed use, as we called it during the first draft. In the second draft, we changed some of the nomenclature here a little bit. So some of the residential attached became residential multi-unit, and some of the residential mixed use did as well. So themes in these changes here, again, it's hard to see on the scale, but I'm just going to say some of the RA goes away to become RDC, as I just said when I was showing you the RDs. I would say that we kind of looked back and sort of checked on the appropriateness of some of the stuff based on comments that we heard. I would say generally we were kind of stepping back a bit in intensity from what we came out with in draft 1. So some of that RX4 became some version of RM, and some of those RM districts kind of stepped down a little bit from, the upper level of units down to something a little bit less intensive. That was, just reflecting, what was on the ground and what we heard from people. Some of the most intensive category here, the RX6, actually became mixed use. So we kind of eliminated a tall residential zone like that. And then specifically on Chamberlain, we made a bunch of changes. There was a whole lot of discussion about that, and we can talk about that more today. But ended up taking some of that previous MX zoning there and changing it to RM. So it's now more residential in character than was originally proposed. Mixed use districts. So this is again your corridors, your community mixed use, your destination mixed use, and downtown in the plan. This is the first draft, and this is the second draft here. So some of the things that you see here, or that you would see if you looked at it a bit closer. I know again it's hard to see. Some of those RX sites become MX, as I just said. There's a lot of new small MX3 sites in sort of neighborhood areas, and that reflects the kind of change that we made to turn some of those places of worship in neighborhood areas and give them MX3 zoning. So, that was controversial. I think we heard like lots of different opinions about that. But that was sort of something we came up with in the second draft. So a lot of those little spots that are kind of isolated are actually places of worship in neighborhoods that got MX3. There's a decrease in density along some of the corridors, both through slight changes in maximum height. So some of the definitions of these districts changed. So before we had 3, 6, 8, and then it became 3, 4, 5, and 7. So there's a little bit of a one-story step down. There's also some changes in mapping. Again, the theme here was mostly kind of slightly taking down the intensity from the first draft. I'm going to say that, to those who are concerned about, wanting to have more density, we're still talking about, more density permissions than currently exist in a lot of places in the city under your current code, but it's a bit of a step back from the first draft. And part of the theme here was, applying those transition standards. There's some places where, we had assigned a height that was just not possible to achieve. And so, we had to take a look back at some of those lot depths in certain places and make sure that it was actually possible to realistically achieve that. Otherwise, it would be sort of pointless to give it that zoning if you can't actually step up to it. We may need to go back and take a look at those again. There was a comment before, I think from a member of the public today, suggesting that maybe some of the step backs were going to preclude certain types of development. They shouldn't unless we've made a mistake. So I think we're going to go back and take a look at some of those more carefully as we do the next round of mapping. Then this is kind of all the other districts together, and after this I'll pause. So this is commercial general, which is your kind of more auto-oriented commercial district, only mapped in very few places. Industrial mixed use, industrial light and heavy, institutional and cemetery. And then here is the second draft of that. I would say, so one thing here is that a lot of places of worship that were previously zoned institutional in the first draft ended up getting shifted to MX3, as I said, and we can talk about that more. There's a lot of just minor corrections to parks and green spaces, including adding some greenways. This is just mostly just kind of fixing some mistakes we made before. We merged the two IX districts together into one, so it's 7 stories instead of 6 and 8. There's a few other specific changes. One thing I noticed was that the Fanshawe Yard industrial site ended up going away from industrial and becoming MX. Maybe a couple others like that, but not a lot of changes to the overall boundaries to industrial. Okay, so I'm going to pause here and just ask if anybody has any comments or wants to discuss this.
The IX, I'm sorry, this is Brian White. The IX going from 6 and 8 to just 7. And it looks like most of what we would think of as Scott's Addition is in that IX, with a lot of properties that are going up there that are taller than 7 stories.
Yeah.
Is there a reason to cap that area at 7
No,
stories?
no. So that might be a case for fixing some of the mapping going forward. I think the thought was that 6 and 8 are pretty close together. It seemed like a little bit funny to have these two different heights. And maybe for the really intensive parts of areas in the industrial mixed use category in Richmond 300, we would just go to a more of like a straight mixed use zone and give them like, MX 13. So there may be some additional sites in those areas that we might want to reconsider just giving a straight up mixed use zone to.
Yeah, I would say that Scott's Addition is formerly industrial, but I don't think there's a lot of that use still going on in that area.
Yeah.
Rita and then Philip, but I think Director Vonk wants to chime in on that question. Yes.
Oh, Scott's Addition in particular, yes.
Yes, please.
Sure. So this is Director Vonk. I think one of the things we looked at, I thought buildings were a lot taller in Scott's Addition as well. But most of the new construction in the area zoned IX is actually 7 stories or less. There's a few cases where they may get that like 1/8 of like the setback. It's building code thing. But they're stick. And we zoned MX along the corridors along Broad and Ash. So I don't feel we created any non-conforming with what's there. It's something we could look at again, if this body desires in the future, but I do feel that the IX does cover most of everything that's been constructed or is in the pipeline for being constructed. So.
Yeah, it's hard to see here, but that first block along Broad Street is MX 13 for the most part, so that's not IX actually.
Rita and Philip.
I was just wondering on the RX category, when one of the things that changed too is that not only did we map it different, the way we defined them all changed.
Yeah.
So like, not necessarily apples to apples comparison when we're looking at the maps in terms of like what kind of built form we're encouraging. And so specifically on RX, when we had RX on Chamberlain, and then we went to RMC, did the RX previously allow a little bit of commercial?
It did. So RX was like basically a fully mixed use zone, except that your commercial uses were limited to the first floor. So you could have commercial of unlimited scale on the first floor.
Okay.
Um,
And then now the RMC does that allow, I can't remember what commercial that allows. I have to look at the.
yeah, so that does allow commercial as well.
Yeah.
So the RMs do.
Not the whole ground story.
Not
just
the
a
whole ground
portion
story.
of, just a portion of it.
It's a portion of the ground story. Okay. Okay. I'm good.
Yeah, I had a question about Chamberlain as well in slides 6 and 7. I'm trying to, you described that there's more RM on Chamberlain replacing some MX. Sort of hard to see, but it looks like maybe there've been two more blocks of RM added. Can you comment on the sort of the quantity of the RM that's been added? And the bigger question really is what is Chamberlain, what is the impact of this going to be on Chamberlain? We've heard a lot of comments from the public about that. And also the city also wants to make it a primary corridor. But first of all, what are the add backs, if you will, to Chamberlain in this draft 2? And what do you think that'll do for Chamberlain or to Chamberlain?
Yeah, so I think in the original one, so what you're seeing here, there was a sort of larger stretches around intersections that were MX, and we ended up changing that back to RM, the new definition of RM. So we're also talked more about contextual front setbacks, which we're, I think a lot of the concerns people had initially was that you have these big setbacks right now, and that they didn't want it to become like a sort of fully kind of urban character where everything came up to the street, and they wanted it to be, predominantly residential. So I think we've tried to respond to that, while still allowing, a little bit of potential to go upwards or add intensity, should some of those apartment buildings be replaced by something a little bit bigger. So that's kind of what we're trying to achieve, but it's an odd one. We've talked a lot about it because it's called as a corridor in Richmond 300, but unlike a lot of the other corridors, which are more like traditional main streets, it doesn't really have that feel today. So that's kind of the needle that we're trying to thread.
Thanks.
Brian?
Brian White again. The commercial ground floor requirement in some of the districts, I think MX and probably some others as well. Might we want to look at that in that retail is dead and probably not coming back in the near future. The office environment in the city is poor. And we've got all these spaces that are sitting empty that could be housing. But they can't be because we require commercial on the ground floor. And so we have a bunch of vacant storefronts as opposed to housing units. We thought.
Yeah, I think we hear you. None of these districts intrinsically require commercial on the ground floor, but there is the retail overlay. So.
Yeah, it's, if somebody's gonna buy a old, small building with, traditionally commercial, the ground floor, maybe a couple of housing units upstairs, they can't get underwriting on the commercial portion of it. So they either have to build it with cash or not do it. Seems like if you could.
Can we clarify that there's no requirements for commercial?
There is not.
There's not.
Oh.
No.
Overlay, I don't think that exists.
Correct. So one of the things,
Thank you.
This is Kevin
Clarity.
Bond. So in all of the mixed use districts, or anywhere that a commercial is allowed, it is permissive. So these have permissive uses for a variety of things, especially on the first floor. There's some things we'll talk about later about fenestration and facades and things, but in terms of use, there are no required specific uses on there. I think the discussion about retail overlay may be something I'll say in the future, and that is if there's areas like right now we have on our zoning map street-oriented commercial streets that say, all right, on these streets you have to do specific things. That's not in there now. That may be an option in the future, and that may be a way to look at, all right, in particular areas may you want to do, but overall the base zoning has no minimum retail or commercial requirements.
Yeah, I think we had this discussion like quite a while back about retail overlays, and there was like, I know, some different opinions about that, but it's correct. It's not in there right now.
But
on this topic, this is Maritza Peachin. There is a active depth requirement and like what it says what doesn't constitute active. I don't know this.
So,
this
sorry, sorry to interrupt.
what does constitute.
Yeah, so it's any kind of usable space. So the intention of that is really to prohibit you from doing like usable interior space. Like, so it could be residential or it could be commercial, but it's intended to prohibit you from doing parking right up to the front of the building, or doing something like a corridor or a storage space or something like that right on the front of the building, which occasionally people try to do.
So
But it's really just about.
Go ahead. Sorry. One of the challenges with the percentage that you can't have 20% of it be like an equipment room or stairwell or whatever is that oftentimes like you want to have your equipment room, like all of the utility providers want that to be near the right of way. And if you only have one facade, like there might need to be some sort of like, or it can be up to this width if that's a ridiculously small number, right? Because like you need to have your equipment room there. You need to have your gas meter somewhere on the edge. You need to have a stairwell exit on an edge. So if your facade is 50 feet long and 20% of it can't be devoted to those things, where the heck are you going to put them if you only have one?
Yeah, we can think about that. Maybe it'll cap out a certain amount if you have like a narrow lot. Like maybe you'll get an exception out of it.
And then like this is sort of like we have the blank wall thing already too. So like don't those kind of already aren't they achieving the same thing?
No,
Kind of
because
Not
this is going
exactly.
into the building, where the blank wall is the facade of the building.
Like
They kind of work in concert.
Like you could have a parking area on the first floor of a building and have windows looking into the parking area, and then it wouldn't be a blank wall. But we still don't necessarily want that. So I think that's the intent.
Jennifer and Charlie, Benny's, or excuse me, Dr. Cradle has been waiting patiently. Do you have any questions on this specific topic? Okay, Charlie, go ahead and get that, and then we'll go to Dr. Cradle, and then.
Yeah, one thing that could allow for flexibility in the future. A lot of these districts have different ground story height minimums for 10 and 12 feet, one for residential, one for non-residential. That makes sense right now if someone's coming in and building something to do a specific thing. I'm wondering if, I don't know if it's a good idea or a bad idea, but it might be worth thinking about making it all, for instance, 12 feet for non-residential, like 12 feet regardless, so that in the future, if a building wants to become something other than it exists at construction, it's more plug and play to, oh, it used to be ground floor residences, but man, we really want to do a little like, cantina taqueria thing here. We need to put a range at it. We need greater ceiling height. It could allow for more spontaneity in the future, which is a part of a fun urban environment, right? So anyway, just a thought. Don't know if it's a good idea or a bad idea.
Dr. Cradle and then Damien.
I had an entirely different question. Okay, I'm looking at slide 11. I'm a clergy person, and if I don't ask this question, I may get rebuked. I'm curious, and I believe that you maybe have, I believe I asked it last month, but I want to ask it again. Many places of worship now being MX. Can you explain what the benefit would be, one? And then number two, just for my understanding, when we say many places of worship, was there a particular rule or a particular measure by which we classified that?
Like how we defined what a place of worship is?
Yes.
And maybe you gotta put this to, I don't know, Colin or staff want to jump in. I wasn't quite part of this mapping discussion that happened when we made the change.
Sure, this is Kevin. I can chime in. So I think when we took a look, one of the changes is everything in the first draft we did institutional, including churches, places of worship. And so what we looked at what is on the ground in terms of, again, it's not perfect, but what we felt were active churches and places of worship. We said, look at zoning those MX3, which is, I'll say, like the entry level mixed use district. Part of that comes from looking at one, currently in the current code, churches and places of worship are allowed pretty much everywhere in the community. But you can also understand that in practice, churches and places of worship can be pretty intense and impactful uses, right? Because there aren't really rules in terms of how large that structure could be, or how large your congregation could be, or how many times a week you run services. And so, right, there's potential that some could be pretty impactful. So there is, I'll say, an essence of already activity in terms of what they are right now. We've also seen churches look at maybe doing some more accessory uses as they evolve over time, right? So some have been actively involved, right, in doing housing. Some have been doing, and whether for their parishioners or others, small scale, right, food. And where we're going with this is that I think with the MX3, it provides churches and places of worship to continue to do what they've done, right? You can continue to have these assembly uses in the future, but it also allows for them to do housing, where some have talked about, all right, starting with attached homes to small multifamily buildings. Again, capping at 3 stories in height, and I forget the off the top of my head, but just right, smaller multifamily buildings. But it also allows them to do a small amount of commercial, again, akin with MX3. It's a limited set of commercial uses. And so it allows them to diversify. And then the last part is these churches and places of worship are also, again, because they're allowed right all the way down to R1 right now, they're in areas where we have wide swaths of residential and absolutely no mixed use. So we have heard from some community members saying, hey, I want to be able to walk to something. Like, where do I walk to, or what's close by? And so, all right, here's an opportunity to have, I'll say, even like, I don't know what's smaller than micro, but like micro nodes where you could potentially have just something small that serves the neighborhood and the community. So that was, I think, just in terms of a staff recommendation with the consultants to say, look, let's look at this opportunity to have those places zoned MX3, again, to allow them to continue to do what they do now. But hey, here's a way to introduce, as we talk about like potential mixed use in residential neighborhoods.
That answer your question, Dr. Brittle?
Somewhat. I think I'm curious as to why why take it out of the category to accomplish that? And part of it could be me not knowing all about zoning. But I'm curious as to, I see the benefits of that definitely. I'm curious as to what many pastors may not understand zoning also. So I'm just curious as to what the blowback would be, I guess. If at all. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, if I could respond. This is Eric, yeah, lots of churches throughout the country are losing their attendance. And lots of these buildings are falling into disrepair. And so many churches are looking at selling their buildings, but many of them are also looking at opportunities to serve their community. And so some zoning districts don't allow them to do multifamily, which is usually the type of use that they want to do. So that is kind of the benefit of doing this. It provides that flexibility. There is a push at the state level to allow faith-based organizations to do this by right. So I think the city's doing a good job by getting ahead of this.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
If we're gonna get Damien, he's been waiting patiently, and then see Mr. Gunn online, and then we'll get you, Riley.
Yeah, thank you, Damien Pitt. First of all, Kevin, I think the word you were looking for there was nano nodes. Perhaps that's something we could coin in this process. But yeah, so I want to step back from the details for a second, and in terms of the change, the overall changes from draft one to draft two seem to me to be perhaps individually justifiable, but collectively stepping back, reducing the amount of development potential. I want to say density, but I keep coming back to the idea that under Richmond 300, we calculate, my colleagues at Wilder School calculated that we need 35,000 housing units. They create a range of options. The city selected the middle option, right, for Richmond 300. Those calculations were like 8 years ago, so I wonder if that's even underselling it at this point. And the process changing from draft one to draft two, we've made the aforementioned changes to the duplex options. We have changed some of the zoning district categories and such in a way that's largely downshifting the development potential as we lose RX4, as we now have 3 multi-unit districts, none of which allow beyond 4 stories, and our mixed-use districts have ticked down from a 6 and an 8 to a 7, a 5, and a 4. Then, as we look at the kind of granular mapping changes, they're largely marginal, I would say, overall, but all in the direction of the downshifting previous to draft one. So where's that? I'd like to hear what staff and the consultants think about where that all leaves us with respect to the zoning that we have now, in terms of, are we actually even moving the ball forward at this point under draft two, in terms of the potential to hit those 35,000 or more housing units that we know we're going to need in order to, address the housing crisis here.
Sure. So I can answer, I think some of the rationale behind what, again, I think in context may seem like downshifting in some areas. I will say one of the things that drove the preservation bonus and perhaps down zoning in some particular areas was the cautioning against displacement. And so I think just understanding that in some areas, right, by allowing much more to be built than what could be built there currently, that could potentially put at risk some of our naturally occurring affordable housing. And so I think this is one of the things, again, where I'll say like duplex by right versus like an extra ADU. We are working on, and hopefully by our next meeting, we'll have some economic analysis to do this testing in the residential areas to see like, is there a discernible difference depending on what you allow and what might change. And so I'll say for sure that was one along the Chamberlain Ave corridor where we had done some significant changes. We are working, I'll say separately on a separate path to do some additional land use analysis, tied in with the expansion of the north-south bus rapid transit, saying, look, let's not exacerbate the problem right now. Let's get a better understanding of what may happen, and potentially in the future, we may come back and look at upzoning some of those again to what we had initially, but not at this point. So I think that reason was displacement. A second one where I think you saw maybe some areas go from RA to RC goes back to really looking at what is on the ground and how zoning was applied in the 70s. And you will see that there were racial disparities in terms of neighborhoods that were probably overzoned, where you have the same type of built environment. And then some areas got this level of zoning and other areas got one level up. Even though the kind of on the ground context was the same, right? This neighborhood was already established. It wasn't to like set the path for what was going to be happening moving forward. And so what we are trying to do is saying, look, based on, look back at also like the pattern book, based on the geographic context of like what is here on the ground, the 70s zoning had 2 different zoning categories. We should have the same zoning category. So I think that led to some of the RDC areas that had probably been, I'll say, some of the R double digits in the future. And I'll say in parts of Highland Park and in parts of the East End is where we made some of those changes. And then the third thing is we are also trying to do, again, every time we go through this, we get more granular, is trying to understand like what is even possible, realistic. And so some areas, let's just say like, right, we take a paintbrush down Broad Street and like MX13 makes sense, right? Because it's like, that's the Pulse corridor, we want to upzone some things. But then as we start to go through on a parcel by parcel basis, this parcel is like super narrow. It's not very deep. I guess technically anything's possible with the right amount of like engineering and cash to throw at it, but like the likelihood of a 13-story building is probably not going to be realistic there. So what is more realistic in some of these corridors? So I'll say, I think we're trying to say, all right, based on some of those parameters, what's kind of the max that you could get there? And that had some of that shift. I agree with you in terms of, I'll say like the 35,000 or 30,000 units. I think that's what we talked with in the mayor's housing plan that came out. Right, we're kind of 10 years in already, but we still feel we're right at that need of like, we're probably going to need about 30,000 housing units. So as we start to kind of settle on what may be possible here, we'll probably be running some more numbers to see where is that going to happen. And just the last thing, going back to, the points that are made, to what degree, like, yep, some of that's probably going to happen in the residential areas, but like, where's that going to happen on the corridors and where's that going to happen in the nodes that we want to, to have that significant growth?
Yeah, I mean, acknowledging my comment that each of these changes might be individually justifiable, and you individually justified each of them from draft 1 to draft 2. I don't disagree with anything you said there, but my question remains, like, where are we now? Where does draft 2 put us relative to the development potential we have under the current zoning? Is there anything we can say to assure the housing advocates and the young people who are looking to buy homes and or rent affordable units in the city that these changes are an improvement upon what we have now after all these, but the draft 2 is an improvement over what we have now in that regard?
I mean, maybe I can answer that just to say that I think that, I'm pretty confident draft 2 is an improvement over what you have now. And we could make a version of these maps that look, instead of looking at draft 1 and draft 2, look at the existing zoning versus draft 2. And I think you would see that there's an increase in opportunities for sure between those two things. That's the goal anyways, for sure.
And we've also added the ability to do different types of housing options in different places across the city. So adding, some additional intensity into the neighborhoods, and then adding the sublot provision that allows folks to build kind of more fee simple, more affordable, ownership options is definitely a big change in the ordinance.
Yeah, I would say that, sorry, I was just gonna say, somebody was talking about downzoning before. I think there's only, obviously draft 1 was never actually enforced as a zoning code, so it's not really down zoning, but there's probably very few places where there is down zoning from the existing zoning, and we tried to be very careful about avoiding that. I think that situation where there's attached areas that are now shifting to RDC, or areas that are currently zoned that would allow attached or multi-unit to RDC, that's a particular exception for the reasons that Kevin mentioned, but very few other situations like that, I think. But sorry, go ahead.
This is Kevin again. I was just gonna say one other thing that I think also sometimes gets lost is, I think we try and also reference, we're trying to legalize what is on the ground here. And so, it'd be a great study. Don't ask us to do it, but like, right, what are the SUPs or what is the development that never came forward because they have to go through an SUP because of something like what I call silly, like a setback or a lot width, or something that's like every other house in the neighborhood, right, has the same kind of constraints, but this new one is there. And so I think going a long ways by just in these new districts, getting the appropriate lot widths and height is going to go a long way towards opening up things that have maybe been kept down with the current code.
You mean if you have okay, we're gonna go.
Agree that reducing the non-conforming use problem is a big accomplishment of this. Yeah.
We're gonna let Andrew go, who's been waiting so patiently. And then after that, Riley. Andrew, you can go ahead and unmute.
Thank you very much. This is Andrew Bunn. Originally, I raised my hand about the church question, but Eric pretty much said what I was going to say, so I'll second his comment on that. I did have two very brief questions, or I guess comments on the individual justifications that Damien brought up. First, I'm glad that the sort of two-tiered system of the 70s code was brought up, because I think I'm a little bit confused sometimes by the discussion of how that division happened along racial lines, where some areas were upzoned inappropriately. But I think what a lot of people fail to mention is that large swaths of the city were also dramatically underzoned for the same reasons. And while we might say that we want to bring the overzoned areas into an appropriate scale, we often don't acknowledge that the dramatically underzoned large swaths of single family areas are often left completely untouched. And the zoning happened in both directions for the same reason. And I think that's important context to mention when addressing that history. The other one is, I think, when we're talking about what is possible for certain parcels and going through and individually changing parcel zoning based on what seems likely or seems possible. I don't understand, I guess I don't understand why we would change something off of MX13 if a 13-story building isn't possible, as opposed to saying, well, it's not possible, so they're going to build what's appropriate at the scale there, or they're going to collocate two buildings there that would make it possible. I don't quite understand nitpicking zoning parcel by parcel along a corridor that does make sense to be painted with a broad brush, like the Pulse corridors, or existing strong commercial corridors that want to continue growing. I think it makes a lot more sense to let the context speak for itself in the design process, and to try to be more flexible to avoid those silly reasons for development not happening. Something that if 5 years, 10 years down the road, we find out why something didn't happen, and it's because of something silly like that, because one half of this area is 13 and the other half is 7, because it didn't seem possible at the time. I don't love that process, because it kind of seems like we're reaching out into the future to look for something as opposed to letting it happen more organically. That's what I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Riley?
This is Riley Champagne speaking. The conversation moved on a bit from the churches and MX and institutional, but I'll still bring up what I was going to say. There's an interesting case right where I live, which is the Forest Hill Presbyterian Church, which just announced that it's folding its congregation. And I guess it's more of a comment and a question to the staff and the consultants. That particular parcel, it has a lot of public functions. It has a dog park that is now, I think, within the portfolio of Parks and Rec. It's a voting precinct. It has a daycare. It hosts a bunch of different community meetings. And it basically serves as a de facto community center for the neighborhood. So I guess I'm kind of interested in what implications. I think it makes sense because that are as a mix of uses. So like logically, MX3, it makes sense to me. It doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be an apartment building, which I think some people are having a knee-jerk reaction to. But I guess, is there or should there be, or can we brainstorm on what would the process and mechanism be like to preserve dog park, voting precinct, those type of public uses on these particular institutional to MX cases. So I want to bring up that specific example because we could be talking about this one in as soon as a year or two, just because of the news that we got about that particular church.
I was going to turn over to Preston and then Dr. Cradle, if you have a follow-up, and then we'll ask staff to weigh in as well.
Yeah, I think you raise a number of great issues that are relevant, not just to the case study that you offered, but probably to others, church-owned properties throughout the city. And I think this falls under the category of no good deed goes unpunished. Churches are owned, of course, by a private entity. And they often see it as part of their mission to be community oriented, public facing, to do all of the wonderful things that you just enumerated. But at the end of the day, if they can't pay their bills, if they can't pay the cost of renovation, they own land and that land has a marketability. That marketability is also driven by the zoning entitlements associated with that property. And so I think we have to be very careful about putting public burdens on those private property owners. There's actually some legal connotations around doing that. It's called a regulatory taking. There are limits to the government's ability to say, you private property owner have to do certain things on your property to benefit the public. But putting that aside, I think we just have to be careful about how do we use the regulatory process associated with land use to put those public burdens on private property owners. We of course recognize that any upzoning has public implications. The entire process of zoning involves evaluating what are the public externalities that are incumbent upon a rezoning, and then trying to figure out, is there an ability for a property owner to then mitigate those impacts? But if we're talking about church-owned property, I don't think that we necessarily want to say, we're going to assume that the public gets a role in having some future use of that property unless it's fully the property owner's decision. They may find that they want to give the property or give a long-term easement to a dog park to the public. But that should be their decision, and it shouldn't be, in my opinion, again, just speaking for myself, I think the city should tread very lightly in making that an obligation of any private property owner.
Dr. Cradle?
Yes, my last point on this for tonight, I think it would be nice to consider, what are we calling places of worship? We have a lot of churches here in Richmond, all different sizes, all different situations, all different denominations and et cetera. And it would be nice to consider, what are we naming at the place of worship? And also what's important to know is all churches are not struggling. There are several large booming churches here in the area that are quote unquote making impact. I think what's also important to consider is, I believe we had a committee that was focused on places of worship and institutions. I'm not sure what happened to that, but I think that if churches are impactful, then, and also I think what's interesting is when it comes to making sure that we have people who are at the table and who are listening and who are being a part of this conversation, it sounds like that the churches are not. And so I'm interested in how we can further this conversation. And I guess my concern as a church consultant is that we just wouldn't overgeneralize or make certain policies without people who are who have a stake within places of worship at the table, if that makes sense. That's all.
Sure. This is Kevin Bonk. So the two pieces, one to answer the question about amenities or public benefits. Again, zoning is usually permissive and in very few cases can actually make you do one of the things. I think to Mr. Lloyd's point, right now, MX3 does have, amenity space requirements in it in terms of coverage. And so like other uses that are in the MX3, they would be required to do something. But in the amenity space, there may be a variety of options. And I think, long term, we're also talking about are there incentives that, again, not illustrated here, but the more maybe public those amenities become, are there trade-offs that, the developer, the property owner could get, say, hey, there's some benefit to this. So, I think with that, it's a concept that we're working through in terms of, I like the term nano node now, right? It's just, hey, and but to the same point, it's not forcing any church place of worship to do anything. They can continue on for the next 100 years and they continue to be that anchor they are. I think it's just trying to acknowledge a situation in terms of changing from both congregational and land use standpoints, what might be there. And then just to Dr. Cradle, answer your point, and I apologize if I have to cut out early. We are meeting this evening with a large group of Baptist ministers to talk about this. And then just in terms of saying, all right, here are some of the things, because they have a lot of questions, right? What does this mean? I think the first thing to just emphasize is it will allow you to continue to operate as is. There are no changes required for you to do in terms of continuing to be that church or that place of worship. It's, I think, just maybe broadening or widening some other options that you may have in the future that, like, look, if you need to pivot or you need to change or you want to, no obligation to do so, but if you want to, you may have some more options at your disposal.
Any additional questions, Riley?
No, it's good.
Andrew? Sorry, Mary.
In terms of the mapping, and Colin can clarify, what we mapped as churches were things that were on our existing land use mapper as places of worship. So they used that as a more technical, how they matched those. And additionally, Mr. Credo, I can reach out to you, probably not till Friday because tomorrow is crazy, but to work to set up a meeting where we pull together some places of religious leaders to prior to our next advisory council meeting, so we can have that conversation with more than just the Baptist ministers.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay, Andrew, thank you for your patience.
Yeah, of course. This is Andrew Bunn. Just a really quick thing I thought of about this. One of the main values that I see in this change for places of worship. I live in Church Hill. We have quite a few church buildings that have stood vacant for a bit now. I think a big value of this change is if a church does become vacant, allowing more flexibility in its use opens up more potential for it to get reused before it falls into disrepair and has to be demolished. So I think this also provides a lot more opportunity for historic church buildings to be preserved in the future if they do become vacant, without having to go through an intensive sub process for a developer who wants to do something with that building.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions on this topic or this slide before we move forward? About 20 minutes before to finish up this presentation before we get to the next section. So don't want to rush conversation. To be mindful of time. We're good? Okay, Renee?
Sure. Okay, so I think that we've had a pretty broad ranging discussion just now. We touched on a whole lot of issues, not only mapping related. So a lot of those issues, we may be able to move through this really quickly. And so I just wanted to maybe flip through these and sort of see if these are the topics that we share with you in December in terms of changes from draft 1 and draft 2. So I'm not sure if there's, as I flip through these, maybe there's somebody who wants to say something new or something that we missed before. So I'm just maybe going to go through these really quickly. We went through these again last time and just give you guys an opportunity to say anything else before we go on to the admin section. So major changes that happened last time. We had the residential units per lot, minimum and maximum lot width discussion, which we've talked a lot about. There's the preservation bonus issue, the sublots, the contextual front setbacks and heights being added in, which weren't there in the first draft. The approach to commercial uses in residential districts, basically stepping back some of those and making them conditional. Residential building coverage, taking that down a little bit. We've gone really high in the first draft and we brought it back to something that's a bit closer to what you have right now. Side and rear setbacks in RA and RM. So that was a situation where there was no setback requirements in the first draft. And then, we added a little bit more nuance to that and added setbacks for detached buildings to get built there. All the changes around RX, RA, and RDC, which we've kind of already addressed when talking about the maps. The whole debate about whether we're going to have MX3 or MX4, in the end we decided to have both of them. Heights and transitions. This was introducing those transition standards, which we talked to you guys about, between the two drafts. As we said, we did some remapping based on where it was not going to be possible to achieve the maximum height based on transitions. The changes to the institutional district that we just talked about, trees and green space, so introducing the tree canopy requirements, development standards, and then some of the specific changes to Chamberlain Road. So we had, in the last presentation, we had slides in each one of these. I might just throw it open to you guys if there's any of these topics that jogs your memory and there's something that you really want to talk about that we didn't get to in the last discussion.
Riley?
Yeah, and This is Riley speaking. Apologies if I just missed this as one of the newer members. Can you explain why corner lots can now only be subdivided along primary streets? As someone who lives on a corner lot, this doesn't really make sense to me. But maybe I'm missing something, and it also feels like something that undermines the ability for someone to actually create a duplex and an ADU if they have a corner lot, which to me seems like one of the more likely places to make these.
I mean, I can just explain to you the history of that topic, which was that originally when we got rid of minimum lot sizes and we were talking about minimum lot widths only, we thought that for a corner lot, that's, a typical lot is, short along its primary frontage and long, along its side frontage on a corner. If you just kind of maintain that sort of primary lot frontage around the corner, you'd still have the kind of cadence of smaller lots, but you'd be able to get like a lot more, potential infill in there. I think we heard some pushback from people feeling like it was too much intensity, because we're allowing, two units plus an ADU on every lot. And so if we broke up that long lot into, I don't know, 3 or 4 smaller lots along the secondary street, and then each one of those could have 2 plus an ADU. Some people thought that was too much. So that was why we stepped back from that. So I think that's the only rationale.
There are additional questions or comments on this topic? On a hot one.
Well, just like in this example here, like what you have here, like I wouldn't even see a possibility to do a detached ADU on one of those smaller lots. So, that is a very viable option to create a detached fee simple home that is probably very affordable because of its small size. And so,
Yeah, I mean, it may be resolved through the sublot option, which is the other piece that would allow you to kind of to create sublots out of a primary lot if we're going to continue with that idea. And so you could have effectively, fee simple properties fronting on the side street. But it wouldn't allow you to build more than, the total of 2 plus 1.
is a sublot, what's the relation to the primary lot?
So the sublot here was the idea that, taking the 2 plus 1 thing and saying, well, the base case is at 2 plus 1, we assume they're all under the same ownership. So somebody lives in one unit maybe and rents the others, or they rent all of them. I don't know. But we could also have the possibility of breaking up that lot into pieces that would essentially could be owned separately. They would have to follow the same overall regulations. So the same, overall setbacks would apply as in, as if it was under one ownership. But you could have the possibility of affordable small scale, entry level ownership by selling off some of those properties. There's a lot of like technical challenges around this, like more like engineering challenges. So can you get, water access and utilities back there? If it's a corner lot, maybe an easier situation. So
yeah.
I don't know. I would just look at Charlie and be like, is that?
I mean, yeah, Charlie here. Yeah, I think it would be, if you go back to the slide that had the axon drawing of the things that you're not doing anymore, that one. Yeah, I think the concern was, okay, those 2 fronting onto the S street, the side street. I think as previously written, it would have been like a multiplier effect, like, oh, that lot could get a, yeah, it would have been right.
So theoretically, you could have 9 units on that space, including ADUs.
Well, I personally would say power to you. I understand why that was of concern. This would still, as written, I can see how like maybe in instances of corner lots though, with the sublot thing, the sublot as written would still follow the same form as like big main house and ADU, or big duplex and ADU, or big main house and 2 ADUs. In corner lots, I'm wondering if a little bit more flexibility on the size of those side facing units could be considered, not to keep tacking words and verbiage into a clean ordinance, right? But I do wonder if the side streets are contextually, they can be a pretty successful way of adding density that, you know, sometimes does feel weird, but other times it can set a new, you know, hold the corner type precedent that can pull you through neighborhoods in an interesting way. So.
Yeah, we can consider that for sure. I mean, the bottom line here is that you're going from on this particular lot, you're going from a theoretical potential of 9 to maximum of 3. Regardless of whether it's rental or ownership.
Any questions? Melissa?
This is Melissa Savinko. I love the idea conceptually of having the opportunity for smaller lots and smaller homes for ownership opportunities. But, and I believe you mentioned last time that this is something that had been done in Oregon. Can you provide any other context for where it's been done and how it's functioned?
We could, yes. I don't have anything off the top of my head, but and also Charlottesville is doing something similar to this as well.
Would caution using, this is Elizabeth, I would caution using Charlottesville at the moment, just because of the lawsuits and just everything that's surrounding that process right now. I think some folks might not think that's the best example. So if someone disagrees, chime in. No offense to Charlottesville, but I haven't read the ordinance, don't know it, but just.
This is Eric. I mean, I would just recommend looking at an architect named Eric Kronberg. He does a lot of great infill development, kind of looking at, you know, underutilized space, creating diverse housing options within a single block. He's a great example of how these things can work.
Anybody else before Renee and Colin move on? Eric and then Riley.
Sorry.
Benny?
This is Eric. I guess, you know, I think obviously the height determinations were kind of based on existing character. This is just kind of a general question. If builders or developers who work in the city were engaged to kind of understand, you know, what is actually cost feasible and cost efficient in terms of heights to build. When we're thinking about affordability, you want to be able to bring down the cost to build multifamily housing. And so that line of, you know, density and height isn't a straight line. There is a dip where you'll see that sometimes if you build up to 8, it is cost feasible. And then when you hit 9, it starts to kind of go down. And so then when you kind of have to look at the market and what it, you know, building types, materials, and all of those things, but it's really important to understand the builder's perspective in this too. Just wondering if that was done.
Are you talking about in any heights in particular, like 7, 8, 9 story building, or
like breaks in the building code requirements?
Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to understand, you know, hey, we're builders kind of consulted to say, hey, yeah, if we could build 8 here instead of 7, we could build this a lot cheaper.
Yeah.
And you know, potentially provide more affordability, blah, 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 right? And so, you know, I want to make sure that there is that balance there as well, where, okay, you're hitting 7, and then builders are like, okay, well, it makes more sense for me to build 6 because that is more cost feasible for me rather than building 7. So
yeah. Well, 7 is the cutoff for the high-rise building code. So once you go to 8 stories, for the most part, you have to switch building codes, and so it becomes a lot more expensive. So you won't see a lot of 8, 9, 10-story buildings. In order to get the cost back out of your building, because you've changed building code, you're moving up to, you know, 13, 14 stories. you don't see a lot of stories in between. So 7 stories is the cutoff for the most part. You might see the odd 8-story building, but I think that's because the top story of the building is like a 2-story, penthouse or something like that.
Well, and this is Elizabeth. I'm not a builder, but I do know a little bit to be able to say that even when you're even lower, like 4, 5, 6 stories, that changes types of materials, which also drives cost. To your point, Eric, you were asking not just about cost or building code, but cost as well. So I mean, there's a difference when you go, I'm looking at Brian, I think from 5 to 6 stories or 4 to 5.
I mean, it depends. So you can have sticks up, 4 stories and you're gonna have some concrete below it, but eventually you gotta do all concrete steel.
Yeah. That's where the real cost changes, is when you go into that high-rise building code.
Director Vonk, did you have a response before we turn it over to Brian?
Yeah, just one, it's Kevin Vonk. I think the other building code piece we're looking at is there's zoning that allows for the building, but I feel there's also a lot of discussion about the building code itself and other communities, places that have made modifications to the building code. And just again, in short, usually when you go from unit 2 to unit 3, you enter a whole new world of commercial building code, right? Stairs, sprinklers, things become much more expensive. So when we are thinking about some of these RM districts, right, we talk about this missing middle housing of like 3 to 12 units. Sure, theoretically, we can zone for it, but per building code, it may not pencil right now, primarily because of sprinklers and staircases. So I think we're just also trying to think that, I know there's been discussion, and other communities have done this, about like those may be forthcoming that may make some of those projects more feasible in the future. And so we're just thinking about, all right, if those were to change, where are the areas that, all right, maybe not today, they wouldn't get developed, but like I'll say in the foreseeable future, there may be more likelihood of that happening.
Benny?
Yeah, just, I'll just say it in case it's helpful. This is Riley speaking. I think I realized what my confusion was that I was just merging the words subdivision and sublot into my brain. And I think a lot of neighbors and people I've talked to about this, so it might just be a matter of getting a bit more clarification on the diagram and the explanation of this, because I was reading these two things as like very contradictory. But now, when you explained it, I'm like, oh, I see, these are 2 different things. You're not creating a brand new lot with the sublot thing, but I just wasn't up enough on the planning jargon, I think, maybe to fully comprehend that, to explain it. So thank you.
Benny and then Philip?
Benny Gates, I'm just piggybacking about the Charlottesville comment. I just wanted to make sure I had the fact check real quick. Being a cancer champion, I do things with Massey Comprehensive Cancer Center and UVA's Comprehensive Cancer Center. So I'm in Charlottesville quite a lot. The lawsuit was settled, and I feel as though, and this is just how I feel, I respect UVA and I respect Charlottesville, but we are the capital of this Commonwealth, and we should be setting the standards and not following behind anybody. But at the end of the day, we should really delve into making a real strong effort into setting the standard for this Commonwealth. We can set the tone for this Commonwealth, but we have to do the right things when we do. You don't want to make a mistake and then be slapped with lawsuits for no reason, frivolous lawsuits. We don't have time for that. It's been too time consuming. I know time is valuable. I've learned one thing: you can't get time back. You can get money back. You can get a lot of things back in life, but the time that you lose, it's gone forever. So we have to be diligent about not wasting time.
Benny? Philip?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the sublot strategy. I'm not sure I fully understand it. I don't know how you would have fee simple ownership of a lot without subdividing it or without creating some kind of condominium. But putting that aside, I think that this is really an interesting idea. If we could find a way I don't see this as a adding density. This is adding private ownership to that ADU or that second unit. I think that's very, very interesting and could go a long way. I mean, look at it. the single most asset of most people who own homes is their home. And increasing home ownership, even if it's of a small structure, it would be, I think, a very powerful and positive thing. So I think we ought to keep working on this one.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think sublot is just a word, right? It's just a word that is being deployed here. And legally, this could very well be something with a property line drawn where that red dash is.
Yeah, subdivision.
Right, and that might.
So you're changing subdivision code to allow these micro parcels, but the overall density is remaining the same.
Yeah, I think it already exists. It's called a
It's
lot.
just the line for ownership.
It's just it's changing your lot size through the regulations then to allow for you to monetize it by selling it off.
Or not.
It makes it easier
Or not.
to do than the current.
Exactly.
Okay.
So it becomes two simple lots.
But as I understand it, they're characterizing it as something different. If you take one lot and split it now, then now you have two lots, each of which has their own set of setbacks, building coverage, and lot width requirements, right?
Yeah.
This is just characterizing it as a scenario where you
Not doing that.
get the benefit of a lot split, so to speak, but that the original lot is the one to which setbacks, building coverage, and lot width standards apply.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, I'm just saying that the concept exists now, but we're taking away the requirements that each of them has to comply with that.
Sure.
And it has different frontage requirements for the sublot, so you don't have to front a street for the individual sublot, which is different. You know, typically lots have to front streets.
Yeah, you do have to have some sort of access or easement to it, but
Amy, did you have a follow-up?
I have a comment on something else if we're done with sublots.
We'll get Andrew or Damien, and then Andrew, I saw your hand pop up, and then we probably need to, as much as I hate to end a good conversation, get wrapped up because I think there was a second presentation and we have about 15 minutes left.
My question is on the side and rear setbacks page. And I'm having a little trouble following as I cross-reference the draft 2 of the zoning code with what's said here. You're saying side setbacks have been added to RA, RMA, and RMB. As I'm looking at RMA. What it says side interior minimum 0, side end 3. So what exactly is different here?
Well, previously we didn't have any setbacks in those districts. I think it was 0. So we've added a setback for end units, I guess. So just allowing that 0 setback if you're going to be attached to the building that's next to you. But otherwise, if you have a set of townhomes, the internal lot lines within that townhome project, the setbacks can be 0 to allow the townhomes to touch each other. But at the end of the set of townhome units, there's side setbacks required.
Well, but so
That makes sense.
internally, if there are currently, just hypothetically, if you lived on a block that had a lot of non-attached units, but for which the side setbacks were like 1 foot and non-conforming, you're saying now these internal, there would still be 0 side setback even if it's not attached?
If it's detached, I guess it would have 3-foot side setbacks on either side.
if it's an existing non-conforming building, though, it's fine. This is, for new construction.
There might be implications if you want to add on or something, so we'd have to
Yeah,
look
that's
into that.
currently a problem in my neighborhood. Virtually every house is non-conforming on the side setback. So anytime you want to do anything becomes a challenge. And I just want to make sure that I think that the spirit was we're trying to,
Make
get behind
things easier. Yeah. Okay.
Come back to that.
Thanks, Damien. Andrew?
Yes, I wanted to, in the general comments time period, wanted to very briefly reiterate something I mentioned last month, which is that I'm concerned a lot about the way that the contextual design is implemented here. I am a little worried that because there are no minimums on the higher density areas or the lot allowances, that placing a very low building on a block will essentially spoil the potential of that block to be built at a higher roof line or at a higher density. And if it was zoned for a higher density, then it is likely appropriate for that density, and building something at a much lower level will then eliminate the ability to build at that. So you could put a single family home, 1 story, on a 7-story zoning area.
Yeah.
And that's a lot more likely than maxing out the zoning heights and densities, which rarely happens. So I'm worried about the fact that there's not really a control for the fact that there's no minimum.
Well, just to be clear, this contextual height requirement only applies in the RD districts, and I think the RA.
I think you may just be talking
That's the
about, I think you may just be talking about, minimum heights in general, like if somebody wanted to build like a 1-story building downtown or whatever, like, that's a waste of space, something like that.
I mean it in both ways, but knowing that it's limited to the RA and detached areas, that does help with that concern. But I am also concerned about the lack of minimums generally,
which I know we've discussed internally.
Yeah, we talked about it with staff. I mean, we can add. I mean, we certainly consider adding minimums in. I think usually when we do that, it's pretty conservative though, so it's not like. It's not pushing things too hard. It's more like, so downtown, you can't build a building less than 3 stories or something like that, or I don't know, something like that, just to stop you from building something that's like wildly out of context. But generally speaking, people are not motivated to build, buildings that are way below, the potential. It's just to stop, I don't know, the odd person who might want to try and do something like that. But, and we don't, it's tough in a few other reasons because we don't want to, prevent somebody from doing something that might be good in other reasons. And it's also challenging when you have buildings that have different heights that have, might have a back wing that's lower or something like that. We can certainly.
It is challenging to regulate, but I think we hear your concern, Andrew.
Yeah.
And so I think we'll
This is
look
Elizabeth.
at it again.
Moving, I think if you guys could maybe work on some language or some possible amendments. Charlie has a quick response, and then we're going to turn it to Jennifer. And then we're wrapping this one up.
So quick, for this contextual building height thing, I just pulled up the rules of interpretation. Something that might be considered to be added is the current zoning ordinance that we have. There are things about distance to other principal structures affecting, for instance, setback along a street. Maybe we can consider doing that here, because right now it's just like, if you're next to a lot that has a house on it, that house might be 200 feet away, right? It might not matter that much. Unless I'm missing something. Wondering if we can add relativity via actual observed survey distance to another structure, which I think is more the concern versus something more nebulous, like a 3-story house 200 feet away from a 1-story house. Hypothetically. So.
And this is Jennifer Mullen. I'll be quick. Mine's also on the contextual. Just every zoning district allows for, all our districts right now allow for 35 feet in height. So I just fundamentally have a hard time with this one saying if there happens to be a 1-story house next door, then you can't build even what the current envelope allows for. So I think Damien said it better than I did last time, but just to revisit the contextual nature of it, I just think it's hard for me to wrap my head around.
Yeah, it's mostly impacting the 3 stories. So you could only do 2 stories or 2.5 stories instead of 3, which might turn out to be 3.5 stories if you put something in the roof, as much as anything.
But this is one place where, this is, an actual downzoning of a sort compared to what you're allowed to do today. But it was partly in response to people's concerns about, mega houses or whatever being built in certain neighborhoods.
I mean,
We're addressing a different problem with the zoning ordinance, and so that's really probably what my problem is.
Understood.
Yeah, I would suggest you don't see a ton of 3-story single-family houses out there.
Fan.
Yeah, in the RD districts. And I slightly misspoke, and the contextual height requirement doesn't apply in RDA.
That was an
So,
error. But it does apply all the way up to RMC. So it's
Yeah.
more than just the RDs and the RA districts.
Which I just, again, in certain neighborhoods, if you're thinking about adding density on the corridors and nodes, I think there's opportunity, but there happens to probably be some 1 or 2-story houses that are just gonna go to that artificial lowering.
Before we wrap up, Elizabeth, could I just have like a couple minutes just to flip through the last few slides? Like
Coming back.
the admin section?
Go ahead, Renee.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so I'm just going to skip ahead to the last section before we finish, and
Yeah,
we don't
go
need to really discuss this now, but I just wanted to just give you guys some homework, I guess, or things to look at before the next meeting. So the admin section here, this is sort of what governs the kind of administrative procedures in the code. So it's important, although I would say that we're not making a lot of radical changes to what's there right now in this situation. A lot of the work we've been doing has been much more about the mapping and the standards. Some of the things we're changing here are sort of stylistic and organizational. So we've added a summary table at the beginning, which I think is helpful in terms of sort of summarizing the processes. I'll show you that in a second. We put a kind of common procedures section at the beginning of it. So in a lot of cases, there's kind of similar procedures that you go through for all these different types of things that you might do. Rezonings or variances or special use permits or whatever. But oftentimes there's certain parts of them that can be in common. And so we kind of just to kind of save space, we moved some of that up to the beginning. We've tried to make language a little bit more accessible, remove some of the kind of things that seemed unnecessarily kind of legalese, when I think we could be just as precise without using some of that terminology. We're rethinking some of the role of special exceptions, which I'll just touch on in just a moment. And then again, I'm just going to say about all this stuff, this is, again, a very rough draft, what we're sharing with you. This is not yet part of the, official public draft. So we'd just like to kind of have you guys take this away over the next month and maybe take a look over it and give us your comments and we can discuss it some more next time. And so we'll, like I said before, I think the hope is to try and integrate this into draft 3 when we have that ready to go. The summary table at the beginning here, just to kind of show you what this is. Across the top here are the kind of individuals and bodies that are making decisions and recommendations. And along the left-hand side here are different processes. So from amending the master plan to amending the zoning code, whether it's text, which is usually initiated by staff, or it's a map rezoning, which might be initiated by a property owner. The overlay districts, so creating and amending old and historic districts, issuing certificates of appropriateness, creating design overlay districts, and kind of the equivalent of certificates of appropriateness, the review that takes place for those. So for each one of these, we basically have a few different things added here. R is for review and recommend. So this is, whoever is kind of looking at it initially and making a kind of an initial city recommendation. The D is for whoever is making a final decision on it. And then the A is for an appeal after that decision, if there's somebody who does that. Any of these things, I think, ultimately could be appealed into the court system after that. That's kind of outside the city, though. So this is kind of what appeal process exists within the city. And then where it says PH, that's a public hearing. So there's opportunity for members of the public to weigh in. This is, again, just a kind of a summary. And then it continues here as well through all the different permits that you need for things related to zoning, site plan, conditional use, zoning confirmation letter, et cetera. And then the relief processes that you could go through to ask for exceptions, the variances and special exceptions, administrative variances, which can be granted by staff for very small things. Right now, it's just around setbacks, and special use permits. So this is kind of the summary of the section. And then if you read through the rest of it, you can sort of see each one of those spelt out. A lot of the language is just copied over from your existing code with, like I said, some minor edits. So we're not looking to radically change a lot of the stuff. One thing that we are sort of interested in is special exceptions, which is they're granted by the Board of Zoning Appeal. Which also grants variances, but they're different from variances in the sense that variances are always supposed to be about hardship, whereas special exceptions can be for other reasons. So they're again sort of a release valve that lets you get out of certain provisions in the code within certain parameters. So if you're allowed to get out of these things, you still have to meet certain provisions that are laid out. So you have to be able to sort of check these boxes, and you have to align with a kind of a general intent statement. Some of the things that are currently in there are walls and fences for corner properties. There's some exceptions there. Enlargement for non-conforming uses, which is normally not allowed, but there's some exceptions when you can do that. Reestablishment of non-conforming uses, building height in certain contexts, outside of residential areas, freestanding signs in certain contexts. And there's a number of other things that are in there as well. In chatting with staff, there's kind of an interest in maybe trying to open up this section to allow some other types of things. Given that we're trying to, again, sort of avoid the number of special use permits that are being given now. So maybe this is another, maybe more directed release valve that could happen, where there's maybe some flexibility from certain standards, up to a certain amount. And, if you meet certain requirements, we want to be really careful with this though, because it could easily become just, another kind of free for all where you could change all kinds of things. And, people would be, it wouldn't be transparent in terms of what the requirements would be on people. So we want to be a little bit cautious about this. But things that, are maybe up for discussion for putting into here to some extent would be, things like setbacks and building coverage, building height and width, build to story height, amenity space, active depth and blank wall width, all those sort of major standards. The key provision would be that whatever you do is not negatively affecting your surrounding properties, which obviously is a, subjective matter that would have to be kind of resolved through this hearing. Other things, lot width, and maybe some Stein standards as well. So we can talk about this more next time, but we kind of wanted to have a discussion with you guys at some point about, if we open some of these areas up, where we go and what those provisions are. So we'll stop there.
Yeah, I know we didn't need a lot of time for that, Ms. Elizabeth. So for the ZAC members, you have a copy of the administration chapter in front of you. And as the agenda says, we're gonna take a deeper dive into this in February. And we're also gonna discuss chapters 3 and 4, use provisions and development standards. So you have a lot of reading homework to do between now and our February meeting, which is February 11th at 4 p.m. in this room. So I want to keep everyone on schedule. I just want to note for those in the public, if there are questions or comments that you didn't get to make during the public comment period, you can submit it to richmond300@rba.gov and they will get shared with us. Is there any questions before we adjourn? All right, thank you all for your time tonight.
You're already there, but there's no.
And access.
Yeah, it's just.